This is the Living Vertizontal Podcast, brought to you by the Church at Riverstone, a fellowship of the Church of the Nazarene in Madera, California. We are a podcast that discusses the intersection of Scripture and our lives. Together, we continue the conversation that was started each preceding Sunday morning in our worship gathering.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are the Living Vertizontal Podcast, back with you for season 10 of this podcast. Last week, we were on a break. It was Easter Sunday, and so we decided not to record a podcast. It was the conclusion of our Lent journey together. And as a local congregation, we gathered early on Easter Sunday before sunrise, where we were prompted to take another look. Mary went to the tomb of Jesus expecting death, and the angel invited them to take another look, and instead they found life. Jesus had been resurrected. In the same way, we found ourselves invited to also take another look at those areas in our own lives where we see despair, hopelessness, and difficulty, and to recognize the hope of Christ in the midst of it all. So now we are going back to our journey through the Gospel of Luke. We have made it into chapter 12. At the end of I guess not last season, but the season before that, we got halfway through 12, up to verse 34. So today we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 12, verses 35 through 48. And this specific passage is a passage where Jesus speaks of the importance of readiness at any hour. So with that, let's go ahead and read for today. Natasha, can you read Luke chapter 12, verses 35 through 48?
Yes. Luke chapter 12, verse 35. Be dressed for service and keep your lamps burning. Then you will be like servants waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can open the door for him at once. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds on watch when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself to serve and will have them recline at the table. And he himself will come and wait on them. Even if he comes in the second or third watch of the night and finds them alert, those servants will be blessed. But understand this, if the homeowner had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour you do not expect. Lord, said Peter, are you addressing this parable to us, or to everyone else as well? And the Lord answered, who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their portion at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant says in his heart, my master will be a long time in coming, and he begins to beat the men servants and maidservants, and to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day he does not expect, and at an hour he does not anticipate. Then he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. That servant who knows his master's will, but does not get ready or follow his instructions, will be beaten with many blows. But the one who unknowingly does things worthy of punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be required, and from him who has been entrusted with much, even more will be demanded.
All right. Thank you for reading that for us today, Natasha. As we move into this conversation, perhaps because it has been 7-8
a while.
weeks, it's been a time, couple months,
40 days, right?
Yeah.
Plus some our Sundays.
Exactly. So because it's been a while, maybe it would be best to at least do maybe a general refresher of where we're at in this story of Jesus in the gospel, right? So it should be noted, and maybe it's also important because we just came through Easter, and so we've got this mindset of the resurrected Christ and the victory found in the midst of death. However, we've got to go back again. Like we got to go back in time because that's where we're at in this story of Luke. For him, we are on that journey to the cross still, right? There was that turn that happened. I believe it was in like chapter 9, if my memory serves me well, where Jesus moves from his like ministry around Galilee and turns resolutely towards Jerusalem. The Mount of Transfiguration occurs and he comes down off that mountain and heads straight for Jerusalem. Well, we're on that journey. He is very, very near Jerusalem, most likely kind of in the outskirts of Jerusalem at this point. So his journey is almost complete. And even though his physical journey is almost complete to the locale that he was heading to, now it's kind of like wrapping up that journey of I guess, discipleship, of helping his disciples understand, helping those who are gathering around him understand what it means to follow him, what it looks like to participate in this kingdom, what is expected of them, kind of just working through all those things, because in a moment, he's not going to be there anymore with them. And so if I remember correctly, we even often talked about how this is Jesus working towards like he's preparing them for life in his physical absence. And so with that in mind, like he's just kind of gone through this conversation with the masses. There are these groups and droves of people pressing in, gathering around him. And he most recently had a conversation about like greed and possessions, talking about the importance of trusting God instead of worrying about things, and about how where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. And so that kind of hopefully gives this rapid flyover of where we're at, where we've been as we move into our conversation for today in Luke chapter 12, verse 35.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for us to get this image of the crowds being ever present. I mean, at the beginning of chapter 12, it talks about how there's so many people that the people are actually getting trampled.
Yeah, it's like chaos.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, you got to imagine like a rope drop at a theme park, or like after a football game, and so, a team's just won, and so the fans are going crazy, rushing the field, and you're just caught up in it, right? And so you've got to picture this mass group of people, chaos everywhere, and Jesus is teaching and instructing in the midst of all of these people. And he has recently, just before we get to verse 35, he's turned his attention to the disciples and begun teaching the disciples, but he's doing it in front of all the crowds. So anybody within earshot is able to hear what he's saying. And you still have all these crowds present from what we can tell.
Yes. Yeah. I think a important call out from what you just said about like the chaos that existed there was, again, kind of remembering back to the conversations we were having about like, yes, there was this physical chaos that was occurring, but keeping in mind all this stuff that Jesus has been talking about and these ideas that he's presenting about what this upside down kingdom, like that is probably also very representative of the internal chaos that is existing within these people as they're hearing these just crazy things that Jesus is saying. And the craziness continues as we move into our passage for today.
Yeah. So let's take a look. So as we jump into verse 35, the passage opens up with, be dressed for service and keep your lamps burning. And if you're not a servant, which I'm not, this might put you in a place where you're like, I don't know what that means. I don't burn lamps. I don't plan to. I just turn on the light when I get home. And so kind of what does this mean? And so this idea of dress for service would be that, the servants of the household, even though their master is away, they are still prepared to provide the services that they're expected to provide, even in his absence. They are so ready for when he returns that at a moment's notice, they would be moving into their typical tasks and routines to welcome the master home. And keeping a lamp burning wasn't just as easy as flipping on a light switch. You have to continue to refill the oil. You have to trim the wicks. There's a bunch of things that go into making sure that the lamps stay burning.
Right.
And so you had to be very much on it. And keep in mind, you couldn't just set your Alexa and be like, okay, remind me in 10 minutes, to do this.
Or set an alarm, wake me up in 10 minutes.
Right. Especially in the middle of the night. No, you had to stay alert. You had to be vigilant. You had to be aware of the timing. You had to pay attention. You had to constantly be checking. I mean, this was kind of what a ready servant would look like. Always watching, always waiting, always looking for the next thing they can do to prepare for their master's coming. And so this is kind of the image that we should get as Jesus begins to talk about this parable of these servants that are dressed for service. They're ready, they're watching, they're waiting, they're keeping the lamps burning. And so just really, really faithful picture of these servants for their master.
Yeah. And something about these two different statements, one about the be dressed for service, that's kind of like it is a cultural idiom. And the phrase is to gird your loins, which if you don't know what that is, you can totally look it up. But essentially, it's because of the dress that was typical that day. Like whether it was a male or a female, like you had these robes that were on, and they would go down to your ankles. And around our table on Sunday morning, I was like, I've never run in a dress, so I don't really know. But then one of the women stepped in and was like, it's really not easy. You don't have as big of a stride anymore, so you have to make adjustments. You can't move as quickly.
You're talking about a long dress, too, right?
Very long. Long and probably heavy,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So that's just weight around your ankles. Anyways, so this gird your loins means like gather up your robe and tuck it into your belt so that it's out of the way. So your legs are free to move.
Now we're looking at like a skirt type situation, right?
Like a sports skirt, ready to go. Which this is important also because this kind of carries with it like imagery and calls back to the people of Israel as they were in captivity in Egypt, right? Mm-hmm. When Passover came, that first Passover, this is how they were instructed to eat, with their loins girded, ready to leave. And that's essentially what it marked, is that on a moment's notice, as soon as Pharaoh said leave, they were ready to go. There was no need for any preparation because all the preparation had been done ahead of time. And so when the time came, there was no delay. It was an immediate response. So when we look at this, like be dressed for service, it's this very intentional preparation for an immediate response. Mm-hmm. And then when I think about the keep your lamps burning conversation, again, there is just this high level of intentionality that's involved in that. When I was doing the midweek meditations this week, one of the things that I wrote down about it was someone is awake on purpose. There is purpose behind what this person is doing. So there is a readiness and there is an intentionality for what is happening here. And that's how Jesus begins this conversation, with this pretty intense picture of readiness.
Yeah. And so I think when we talk about the message of this first little chunk of scripture, so verses like 35 through 38, and in this, Jesus goes on to expand a little bit more. They're ready to open the door. They're on watch. They may even be on watch, late into the evening, and we can talk about that just in a moment. But the overall purpose really of these verses is communicating, be ready.
Right.
I want you to be ready. Be ready like the servants. Be ready. And so this kind of, we've been talking a lot about, what Jesus is trying to prepare them for. And so your question might be, well, be ready for what?
Right.
And so obviously Jesus has been teaching, and, as we've been following and journeying along, he's been teaching about the kingdom coming. Mm-hmm. And so when Jesus is communicating to them, be ready, he's saying, be ready for the kingdom, be ready for the inbreaking of this kingdom. And we now know, right, on this side of things, though I don't think they had a full picture of this at the time, but that there will be a second coming, right? Mm-hmm. And we need to be ready for that second meeting of us with Jesus.
Yes, this whole thing is about being ready right here, like you said, the verses 35 through 38. And the one thing that really stuck out to me as I was working through this, which I will also bring up the watches of the night in a moment as a part of what I'm going to say, but is the fact that the initial statement that Jesus makes is for the servants to be dressed for service, right? But then in verse 37, we have the returning of the master happening, or like an allusion to the returning of the master happening. And you would think that if the preparation or the groundwork that Jesus has laid is that the servants are supposed to be ready for the master's return, that once the master gets there, there's going to be these,
serve.
they're going to be serving. There's going to be these tasks that they have to perform and be ready to do.
After all, that's what they're getting ready for.
Right. But there's a different picture that's painted.
Yep.
When the master returns, the very same thing that's expected of the servants is the very thing that the master also is doing. So if you look at verse 37, part B, I'd say, truly I tell you, he, the master, will dress himself to serve, and will have them, the servants, recline at the table, and he himself will come and wait on them. Like, how incredible of an image. And again, remember, there's already this turmoil that's existing in the crowd.
This is real abrupt, yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, wait, what? So, like, I was initially tracking with you, Jesus. You're saying that servants have to be ready for service and they've got to have their lamps trimmed like that. That tracks. Even though we may not always do it, we understand that that's an expectation.
Yeah. Is my servant here? Are they listening?
Right. But then all of a sudden, this conversation of the master enters, and the master looks exactly like the servants. And then isn't just prepared for service, but he actually then serves. That is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, again, we just came through Holy Week, right? In a way, and this kind of came up around our table on Sunday, but in a way, this very much is an allusion to, a foreshadowing to that final week before Jesus is crucified. He literally does this.
Mm-hmm.
He dresses himself for service and even makes the statement, I have set for you an example that you should go and do likewise. He gathers up his robe, he girds his loins, and then he washes the feet of his disciples as they are reclined at the table. That's incredible. Now, that's awesome, right? But we've both now made a comment about, the watches of the night, the second or third watch of the night, and how we would get to that in a moment. So here we are at it. At this point in time, Israel had adopted the Roman 4-watch system for dividing up the night. So the second and third watches would have been the times like 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning.
So 9 to midnight and midnight to 3.
Right, exactly. And if you think about that, I mean, maybe we could all hear like, 9 and 10 isn't too bad, maybe 11. But I'm sure most of us who aren't crazy night owls are hearing these times and going, man, that's kind of a rough part of the night. Like, staying up through that is difficult. Fatigue is very real. The darkness is very real. And it's almost like it's been long enough now, we start having this mentality of, okay, it's not going to be now. Maybe I can rest
Surely
a little
he
bit.
wouldn't come in the middle of the night.
Right. And so first, for those servants who are to be dressed for service and keep their lamps burning, like, that's a big deal. We already talked about the intentionality that must be, but not just the intentionality, but the fight to remain faithful.
Right. This is not an easy task.
Not an easy task.
It requires discipline, focus, and intention.
Absolutely. But then there was something else that also kind of got me about this.
Yeah.
And that is, even in the second or third watch of the night, if and when the master returns during that time, the master still serves. He's not just prepared for service, he serves. And I was just thinking, like, man, so I was, as I read this passage, I put myself in the place of the servant, and I'm like, man, I'd be really tired probably. There'd be, fatigue would be real. But a master returning has been on a journey, has been engaged in something else. The allusion is to like a wedding banquet, right? So he's been off, very involved in a celebration for others.
Well, and he's also, I mean, at this celebration, he is a guest. So
Right.
this is an honored position. It should elevate him
Right.
to this place of pride,
Right.
which contrasts even further against this move he
What
makes
happens,
next.
right? And he's coming potentially at these crazy late hours. I'd imagine it's not just the servants at this point who are tired.
Mm-hmm.
So is he. He's had a journey. He's been at a party. Yeah, he's been elevated for sure. He's been served himself, I'm sure, at that party. But then he comes home. And I know when I come home from a long day, I just want to be home. And it sure would be nice maybe to have a couple of servants who would help me get things prepped at the house and just ready for me to be able to relax. But that's not the way the master sees it. Regardless of the time, regardless of how difficult the journey might have been or how late it might be, he still sees it as an opportunity for not just for him to be prepared and dressed for service, but to actually serve.
Yeah. And it's so incredible that this is what our master is like, right? If we as his servants, as we ready ourselves, as we prepare ourselves, watching, waiting, listening obediently, following his directives, ready to do the next thing, as we do our part, he promises that he will be there to serve our needs, to meet our every needs. And what kind of master, what kind of creator of the universe, what kind of God does that for the created?
Right.
I mean, it's just his love for us is just so magnificent.
Yep.
It's hard. It's so difficult to comprehend. It's such a beautiful thing.
But as we recognize that, as we understand that, as that becomes more clear to us, like how could we not be dressed for service and be willing to keep our lamps burning in the second and third watch when we recognize just the depth of love that he has for us?
So then, of course, when somebody tells you to be ready, then you sit in this place of, well, when do I need to be ready? And so it's like Jesus anticipates this thought. Maybe he knew their thoughts. Luke doesn't say that here, but we've read that before.
It seems pretty.
He probably
consistent.
knew that there was some of this going on, and so he throws this in there, this other parable, which seems unrelated, but really, I mean, the truth behind it just enriches this directive to be ready all the more. He says, but understand this, if the homeowner had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour you do not expect.
Right.
And so the truth of the matter is we don't know when to be ready.
Sure.
And so when you don't know when to be ready, the only thing you can do to be ready is be ready always.
Right.
And so Jesus communicates here to his disciples and to the crowd that's listening on, be ready always.
Mm-hmm.
And so that then can extend to us today as well. So not only do we need to be ready, not only do we need to be ready to serve, resolutely focused on Jesus, listening for his voice, listening for the next thing, watching, waiting, expecting the next thing, but we need to be doing this always.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so many times in like youth ministry when I was serving, and I would talk to teens about just the importance of following him always, right? Ready always. Mm-hmm. Too many times I would say people youth would respond and be like, yeah, but like there's other things that I want to do right now. And there's going to be time for me to do that later. But right now I want to just have fun or whatever, like insert whatever here. And it wasn't necessarily they just wanted to go and do bad things. It was more just, but I want to do what I want to do right now. And that's heartbreaking to hear, especially as you hold it against this passage right here, because Jesus is saying, well, we don't know. You don't know if you're going to have that later time. You've got to be ready at all times. And I, like you said, like we need to hear that today. And whether we're a teenager or in our 30s or 40s or 70s, like whatever it is, like we need to hear this call to readiness always, and recognize always means now, and in a minute or two, and in an hour, and tomorrow, and next week, and the week after that, and also last week. Like, ready always.
And so then Peter, it's always Peter.
It is always Peter. Poor Peter.
He looks and he says, Lord, this is for me, right? This is for us. Like, I know all these other guys are here, but you're talking to us, like the important, special people here. Like, we're the ones who are, the servants. We're the ones who need to be ready always, right? And Jesus doesn't directly begin by being like, yes, Peter, you and everyone else. He doesn't say that. He's really getting at this next thing that Jesus apparently didn't anticipate fast enough, right? He anticipated the when, but not the who.
Well, we know
right?
that Peter likes to like really just go for it. So maybe it wasn't that he didn't anticipate it, and it was more just Peter was like cutting him off, like, all right, well, what about this?
Yeah. And possibly. I don't know.
That's what I see.
We'll
I
have
see
to look
a really
into see what the commentaries
trigger
say.
happy Peter here.
Yeah. So Peter is very concerned with who this applies to. And from this perspective, you could assume that Peter is really looking for affirmation that he and his fellow disciples are set apart. That they are really have this kind of elevated place. So they have this higher responsibility. And because they have this higher responsibility, they're clearly the ones that he should be talking to.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, like Jesus doesn't just go directly to answer Peter, which honestly, I love this about Jesus. He doesn't just give like the low-hanging fruit or immediately address something. He helps you come to an understanding, or he helps those who are asking the questions come to an understanding. We've seen Jesus use this technique many, many times already, even in the Gospel of Luke, where somebody will come to him with a question, and instead of just saying yes or no, he then tells a story.
Or answers with another question.
Which he starts with a question here and then tells a story.
Good question, Peter. Who then is the faithful and wise manager?
Right. And then he asks this question and then presents two possibilities. There's the one manager who does everything that his master would want, and he is prepared and he is ready and he represents the master well. And then there's the one manager who doesn't do that, who doesn't represent the manager well, who maybe begins to take their own interests at heart and decides to use their position to care for themselves more than care for those around them.
Yeah, it's like they really lose focus. They the master is a long time in coming, and so they forget. They think, well, I can do that someday. Like the teenagers that you mentioned, they have that similar mentality or similar heart. And I mean, you mentioned the teenagers, but I feel like we as adults are just as susceptible to this kind of thinking or this kind of mentality where we go about life assuming that today I have all these tasks or things I need to accomplish. Our lives are busy. It's a season we're in, but we'll get back to following Jesus. We'll get back to doing what he wants of us. We'll get back to the church. We'll get back to spending time in prayer. We'll get back to spending time in the scripture. And that sort of mentality is exactly the apathy that Jesus is looking to address here in this parable.
Well, and I feel like that apathy is a perfect description of what we see existing in this one servant who is represented like in verses 45 through 46, where he's the one who says, well, my master's a long time in coming, so I'm just going to do this instead. And man, that apathy is destructive. We see it right here in the parable, just how destructive it can be within the house of this master. But if we think about our own lives and kind of look at situations that we know, we can see just how destructive apathy really is within our own families, within the local church, within the greater church, in our communities, in our places of work. The reality is apathy toward our relationship with Christ is destructive in all of these places. And Jesus knows that. And he is trying to help the people then come to an understanding of just how important this conversation is, just how destructive this apathy has been and is.
And so the question, though, still remains. Who are you talking to, Jesus? Who does these parables now, who do they apply to? And I feel like in verse 47 and 48, this gets really clear. Jesus looks at Peter and he says, that servant who knows his master's will, but does not get ready or follow his instructions, will be beaten with many blows. But the one who unknowingly does things worthy of punishment will be beaten with few blows. And so whether you know or don't know, there's still consequence.
Mm-hmm.
There's still punishment that's seen here.
Mm-hmm.
And so from this, though Jesus doesn't directly state it, we can assume that the answer to Peter's question is everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Regardless of who you are, like a servant is a servant, right? And so he does not differentiate between what the servant is responsible for in the sense of like, this is their task and this is that person's task. And so only the servants with this particular task are the responsible ones, while the servants with this other task are not. Like, if you're a servant, you're a servant.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the servants are the ones being addressed here by Jesus to answer Peter's question. Who then is responsible? Them as well. You and them. Yeah. And I think it's really important for us to pause at the end of this passage here, looking specifically at verses 47 through 48, the last two verses. And while we've just made a statement that these verses, or that Jesus is talking to everyone, right? Peter asked the question, who then does this apply to? Them as well. And Jesus essentially is saying it applies to everyone. Ideally, we'd just be able to conclude it there and say, that's it. Be ready always, everyone. However, unfortunately, I think these last few verses are the source of a lot of misunderstanding. All too often, they are used as a means to essentially permit the existence of like a stratification of responsibility or of people within the faith. I have so many times heard about, like, you know, if you're a pastor, then you're more responsible for things than if you were just like a Sunday school teacher. But then even as a Sunday school teacher, you're more responsible for things than if you were just a congregant. In other words, on like this continuum of things, it's probably safer for you to just stay in the place of congregant, because then you're less responsible. There's less likely for you to be beaten with many blows.
Now you sit in the camp of few blows.
Yeah, you get few blows. Okay, that I would way rather sit in the spot of few blows for sure. But that's not at all what is being said here. And I think for us to read that into this passage is a glorious misunderstanding of what Jesus is saying. When we sat around our table on Sunday morning, these two particular verses were definitely difficult verses for us to work through. And one of the people at our table even brought up, like, this doesn't seem like it doesn't feel right. Like that some are going to be beaten with many blows, and then others are going to be beaten with few blows. And like, so everybody gets punished no matter what. Like, there was just a lot of wrestling there, which is a whole separate issue. But then also this wrestling with, well, no, but I mean, you know, if you are a pastor, then you are more responsible for things. And the truth is, the responsibility has nothing to do with one's position in this conversation that Jesus is having. Now, maybe you can go elsewhere and try to make a case for something, but right here, as we are working through this particular parable, this particular conversation with Jesus in Luke, he is not at all saying that there are some servants who are higher than other servants that will then all of a sudden become a little bit more responsible for something than the other servants. That's not what he's communicating. And probably the best way for me to kind of make that case or bring it back around is to come back around to what I said just a moment ago about, the some being beaten with many blows and some being beaten with few blows, but everybody being punished, and how that just doesn't feel right, and try to address that conversation. So in that conversation on Sunday morning, the question was, well, how would have the people of this time been hearing this? How does this translate? Like, how are we supposed to hear what he's saying? And I think the best way for us to understand that and to approach this is to recognize that the people at this time, they understood what it meant to be a servant. They understood what it meant to have a master. And they also understood this last two verses, like Jesus is talking about the same household. Like, I think too often we think, oh, well, one of these is a servant within one household, and one of them is a servant that's like from 4 houses down, or maybe even one of them is just from somebody outside of this household in general. But that's also not what Jesus is saying. Like, these two servants that he brings up, and before this, the parable that he's talking about, these servants that are being addressed are servants within the same household, servants who have the same master. And so when you think about it like that, you begin to recognize that the servant who knows his master's will, but does not get ready or follow his instructions, that's a servant who has this relational understanding of the expectations of the master and has chosen to do otherwise. That's a problem within a house. And that's a problem that a master is going to need to address pretty pointedly. However, if another servant within that household maybe does not relationally understand the master as well as somebody else, but maybe they do something that is not necessarily in line with how the master would act, but they never knew that before, the master isn't going to come to that person and rip them to shreds. The master is going to come alongside of them and gently correct them and say, hey, that's not what we do here. In this house, things look a little different. And obviously the master or the servant then has the opportunity to either walk in line with the requests of the master or do what the first servant did, which is know the master's will, but then not do it. And so I think for us, like the people of this time standing in the crowd, the disciples listening to what Jesus is saying, they are hearing and recognizing that Jesus is talking about a group of people or servants that are within the same household. And so there is a standard, a level of expectation that the master can have within this household. And there is a level of understanding that the servants ought to have within this household. And so if we expand that out and say, okay, then I think we could all get with this idea that the master is Jesus/God, and that the servants are the disciples / the people, or bring it into today's conversation, the master is Jesus, and we all of those who say that Christ is Lord, we are the servants. Whether we are a pastor, whether we are a Sunday school teacher, whether we are the member of a congregation and we don't do anything leadership-wise whatsoever, if we identify Jesus as Lord, regardless of our positions, we are servants within the house of the Lord. And so when we look at this passage, rather than hearing it or reading it and going, oh yeah, so because I'm not that person, then I have a little bit less responsibility, a little bit less culpability in this conversation.
Or because I am this person, I have more responsibility, and I'm held to a higher standard.
Right. Instead of hearing that, we need to hear what Jesus is actually saying. And that is, since all of you are servants within my household, all of you have an equal responsibility to listen to me, to learn my will, and to get ready and follow my instructions. Another question that was asked on Sunday was like, where does this rule for verse 47, like where does the law that these servants are supposed to be following, where does that come from? Again, go back to the household. It's not that in this time period, a master would just have a list of rules posted to the wall that then every servant, as they entered the house, could go, okay, I know what to do, or I know what I'm not supposed to do. That's not what it was. It was this relational understanding, this relational rule that began to develop between the master and the servants, where they understood how things worked in this house. And similarly, like we are in that same place. Again, Jesus as master, us who call himself Lord as servants. There's not these like written rules and expectations that we are necessarily following. There is, though, this relational rule that exists where we are called to walk in obedience with him. Period. He speaks to us. He directs us. He's willing to lead us and guide us. And what it comes down to is our willingness to listen and to respond. The truth is, when you look at like a household back then with servants and a master, the servants were responsible for different things, for sure. Like there was some who were responsible for keeping the house. There were some who were responsible for working out in the fields. There was some who were responsible for serving the master at the table. Like there's all these different things that they did. But within those, it wasn't that any one was more important than the other, but the expectation of walking in obedience with what they were asked to do by the master was fully present. And that's where we find ourselves today. So it's not necessarily that because you're a pastor, you're somehow above everybody else. But if Jesus is calling you to be a pastor, boy, you better step to that and walk in line and be a pastor. In the same way, if Jesus is calling you to be a nurse, then you better be a nurse and walk in obedience with that and figure out how to be obedient and serve in his kingdom in that position. Jesus is not permitting positions to be the thing that puts you above or below somebody else. He is talking about the importance of obedience and the importance of being ready always, everyone.
And as we imagine Jesus responding in this way to Peter's original question, I feel like I couldn't help but to try to put on, well, what would it have been like to be Peter hearing Jesus say this? And I feel like Jesus's response in this to Peter, I wouldn't be able to help but think, goodness, it really doesn't matter what you're saying, like if it applies to them or not, because you're calling me, you're calling you, you're calling, you and everyone, each one of us, you're saying, follow my instructions. So there's no space for this comparison of me to the crowd. There's no space for this comparison of me to one of my fellow disciples. You're just asking me to focus on you and to be ready or to be obedient, which is how I be ready to you always. And it really is as simple as that. And we don't need to get hung up, I don't think, on all of these other pieces or misconceptions that you brought up, because as you pointed out, Jesus isn't trying to address that. He's trying to help Peter see, and the people who can hear and are listening on to see that you just need to focus on me. You worry about you. You follow my instructions. You be ready always. And if everybody else does likewise, you're going to see the kingdom here in a way that is just beyond anything you could have imagined. And I think that's really what we need to take from both this last part and today's passage as a whole, is that Jesus is asking us, He was asking them, he's asking us, be obedient always, everyone. Keep your focus on me, and I will give you the next set of instructions. And as you obey those continually, you will be ready. You will be that good servant that the master comes home to and just wants to serve, because they are so thankful and so proud of the servants in their household. As you journey with us through the Gospel of Luke, we recommend purchasing Midweek Meditations, A Journey Through Luke, Part 5, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Also, be sure to follow the Living Vertizontal Podcast to stay current on all our new releases. To learn more about the Church at Riverstone, visit us at thechurchatriverstone.org.